večer. Na letošní ročník Febiofestu přijala i legenda filmové kamery, muž, který udělal 10 filmů s Davidem Cronenbergem a jeho jméno najdeme i pod snímkem Hvězdné války nebo pod komedií Mars útočí. Pracoval s takovými režiséry jako s Timem Burtonem nebo s Johnem Bormanem. Je velké potěšení, že můžeme přivítat na plovárně pana Petera Suschitzkého. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, my first question is, how do you feed your imagination?
I think in so many ways that are mysterious to me. I've had a lifelong interest in the arts, and I think of all kinds, literature, painting, music, above all. So I think it's come that way in strange ways.
I think you wanted to become a musician originally.
It was a thought of mine because music was my first love.
Yeah.
And when I left school, I said to my father, I want to study music. And he didn't say, don't be so stupid, but he said, keep that for pleasure. And I suggest you go and study cinematography, because I'd already been taking photographs for a long time as a child until I left school, and even today. I have my camera with me over there. So I went to study cinematography in Paris.
Yeah. I always wonder, how does other people's imagination work? So I thought, when you come to a set, you see the location and you know the scene. Do you know immediately where to put the camera?
I don't know anything. In fact, I used to perhaps still play a game with myself, pretending that I've never done it before.
Yeah.
Because
that's a good way.
Yes, I try to
keep yourself fresh.
That's quite accurate. That's a good summary of what I do, because I try my best to repeat myself, because repetition and formula are a big enemy of creativity. So I pretend to myself that I've never done it before, but then I become frightened.
I guess so.
Yes.
Because the movie is a huge vehicle.
Yes.
You have so many people involved. It's a brave decision to pretend you are doing it for the first time.
Yes, because in a way I'm a performance artist. Everybody's watching me, and I know I have to deliver something within so many minutes.
We used to say about great actors that the camera loves them. I guess you have seen a lot of those. Could we find a good example of an actor? If you see him just coming in the room, you would say, well, okay. And then if you look through the lens, you say, wow.
Yes, I've probably found that with one of the best male actors I've worked with, who was Marcello Mastroianni. But in general, we have to love the actors. That we have to start with that standpoint, because they are the most exposed of all of us.
Yeah, they have to trust you, especially the women.
Absolutely. There's a mutual trust. We have to trust that they will deliver the best performance that they can, and they have to trust that we will not betray the way they look. And
some of the situations are pretty embarrassing. I think it's a kind of embarrassing job to be an actor, because you are forced to do things you would never do in your real life.
I think if you're embarrassed, you'd better not be an actor.
Well, but there are actors who are pretty shy. They just go over it.
They have to overcome it.
Overcome it. And it has some, how to say, some nice flavor. If you see a shy person who overcomes, it has a value.
I think there has to be a part of this, of every actor, even if they are shy, if that's their instinct, there has to be part of them that is also exhibitionist.
Yeah.
Otherwise they wouldn't be doing what they're doing.
Are there situations when you get embarrassed, that you see it, that you would think, oh, I would rather not be in this place now?
No, the only time when I don't want to watch is when there's something very violent happening on the screen.
Well, that's quite often.
But not embarrassed. I'm never embarrassed.
Yeah.
Funny situations or potentially embarrassing situations can have a comic side to them, and I tend to laugh inside myself. But in general, I have to believe that what I'm seeing in the camera is true. And that's why I have to close my eyes when there's something horrible happening in front of the camera. Because if it looks true, then I'm too horrified at it.
Do you recognize it immediately?
Yes,
if it's
yes.
true? Yeah.
There are some scenes in films that I've shot that I've never seen because I close my eyes even in the theatre.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I never thought about that it could be possible. You spend a lot of time with directors. I guess during a movie, it's a lot of hours. You finish a long shooting day. If you think about directors you worked with, not everyone is a good pal to sit and have a drink after the working day, but some of them are. So whom would you pick to have a drink after a long and difficult shooting day?
Most people are so exhausted after a shooting day that they want to be on their own, because during the day you're forced to share your time with a lot of people in very close company, sometimes in a tiny room.
Yeah.
I had good relationships and difficult relationships with directors, but of course you can judge from the number of films I've made with David Cronenberg that it's a good relationship,
yeah,
as a friend and professionally also. He doesn't drink much, but he's very lovely to spend time with.
If we think about your work, which you did with David Cronenberg, those movies are quite dark. I was thinking if you are working on a movie like Crash, which is, I think, a very strong movie, you never forget it. No. If you once see it, you never forget it. Don't you get depressed?
Not at all. I think I laughed more during the making of that film than any other.
What is funny about that film?
I
cannot remember anything.
Well, from the point of view of making it, it was very amusing, very, very difficult also, because we were shooting in the Canadian winter, often at night and outside, but there are several situations in which we had to film which had a comic side to them. For instance, there's a scene in a very small car, a love scene in a car so small it was almost impossible to film. It was what the French call a deux chevaux, a Citroën, smallest Citroën that you could find. And they had to do a love scene in the car. And the actress at the time was feeding her child off the set, so you can imagine what happened. There was some milk coming out during the scene, and she laughed and we laughed. There were some situations which did make us all laugh.
Yeah.
And we needed to laugh because it was such a tough film.
I guess so. You started to work as a DP quite early. You were about 22 or something?
I was 21 when I started, yes.
Is it common?
No, it was unheard of in those days. It was a very hierarchical business in Britain, and probably in the Czech Republic, also in Czechoslovakia at the time. It was necessary to spend 10 years in each job before you got the chance to move on. And normally you couldn't become a director of photography until you were about 40, if you were lucky. I was just fortunate, and I didn't realize how fortunate I was until I understood that everybody, all the professionals much older than me, were looking at me and saying to each other, where does he come from? He knows nothing.
Yeah. And your first job as a DP was a feature film? No,
my first job as a DP was on documentary films. I spent a year in Latin America making documentary films. I was a one-man unit with a journalist.
That means it was more jobs than just a DP.
Yes, I learned a lot of things. Yes.
Sound?
I did the sound
and lighting.
And the focus and the lighting, and sometimes I had to book the hotel as well.
Mostly the DPs are not as well the operators of the camera. But as far as I know, when you worked with David Cronenberg, you did operate the camera every time? Every time, yes. Is it different? I guess you have much more control. Yes, I will go back to my beginnings. After I shot my first film, I then started to shoot in professional movies, and in those days there was a camera operator, and I accepted that as normal. But I now really feel very strongly that in my case, I should do both jobs, because it's impossible to separate the composition from the lighting, because they both influence each other. Well, now at least you can see it on the monitor, but before, if it was shot on film, nobody really had the clue what the guy sees there. It was a nice kind of mystery. Yes, the cameraman had more power
in a sense, because of the mystery, because everybody had to wait until next day.
Yeah.
And the cameraman was the only person who knew more or less what it was going to look like.
Yeah.
But I think the advantages of the modern technology outweigh the disadvantages. I don't mind losing some of the mystery.
Yeah. I think we would hardly find a profession where the new technical equipment changed the whole job so much as it's in the movies.
I think there must be several. I would hope that medicine has changed from the 19th century and transportation and so many things.
Sure. Yeah.
But it is true to say that the technology has changed a lot, but the creative demands haven't changed at all.
Yeah. But the lighting, let's say the lights, it's a completely different world now.
They are much more user-friendly. They're not so hot, and they are the right color if you're filming in day-night. No, there are many advantages to them.
Is it always better, or you miss something of the old equipment, or you use something of the old equipment, like lights?
I'm not sentimental about the change in equipment. I have some loving memories of the old equipment, but I accept the change as usually being for the better. The only thing that's perhaps not so good is that because so many things can be changed afterwards, sometimes there's less thought that is put into doing it beforehand.
Yeah.
When I first went to film school, on my very first day, the teacher of cinematography took me onto the roof of the school, and he was an elderly gentleman who had started working in 1905, and he wanted to show me what it was like to use a silent hand-cranked camera. And he first of all told me, I'm going to sing the marching song that we sang to keep the right rhythm so that we would produce the right speed in 18 frames a second, which was the standard for silent films. And then he taught me...
That was in the 60s?
Yes.
This scene happened...
It was the late 50s, actually. He then told me how he showed me how they would do a dissolve in the camera. And the point of my story is that if you do a dissolve in the camera, you can't change your mind, because you have to wind backwards and then forwards on the next scene, and you have to choose the take you think is the best take before you go backwards and destroy part of it. And then you have to carry the camera to the next location. So it gave me even more respect for the best of the silent films, because they had to make up their minds what they were doing.
It's quite incredible what they could do.
Yes.
It's a completely different art. It has a lot of charm.
But I'm not sentimental about film. Personally, I like digital photography. I still do still photographs on film and digitally. I still have my own laboratory at home. But I think digital photography brings a lot of advantages with it. And we have to accept the change anyway.
Yeah, sure. In your family, you hardly could escape from movies, is it? Your father was a famous cinematographer and a still photographer. Did he comment your work somehow? I'm always curious if the fathers do the same job, what kind of comments they have if they see their kids' work.
He was always very generous with
in
his spirit towards my work. Yeah. And he encouraged me from the time that I was that size, and I was trying to get into his laboratory, and he didn't want me there probably because he knew that it would stop him working. So he gave me chemicals and paper that I could use in the daylight so that I wouldn't be in his way. And slowly he made some comments to help me think about composition, the subject I was photographing. But as I was growing older, he left me very much alone, and when he saw my work, he was always very generous about it.
Do you remember any quote?
I don't have any quotes, no. But I grew up with him pointing his camera at me, and it was always around me.
Your father passed away when he was 104.
That's right.
In good health still?
Well, he died because at that moment he wasn't in good health.
Yeah, well, but when he went over 100 years?
Yes, he was still able to think quite clearly. His movement, his walking became more hesitant, and he sometimes fell, as elderly people do. but generally he was in good health until the end.
Did he like the new technologies?
He didn't understand all of it, but he was ready to embrace them as well, and he had digital still cameras.
Yeah. It's nowadays we have so many special effects that I think maybe with some movies almost half of it is done in post-production. Do you need to think about it when you are on set? Do you consult the setting of the camera with the guy who is responsible for the special effects?
Absolutely, we have to be in close liaison. Of course, I have handled many special effects shots, but I'm not particularly interested in visual effects. I'm interested in the script and telling a story that touches me in some way. But if I have to do visual effects, there is always somebody there who also needs me to talk to him. I don't just need him. It's a two-way conversation. If
you are shooting a movie like Star Wars, does it need a different approach?
No, I think it's still telling a story with actors.
Yeah.
It doesn't need a different approach. You should. I would just say I would approach it normally like any drama.
How did George Lucas pick you up?
Many years later, that he, when he was a student, had seen one of my early films and liked the look of it. And he approached me about the first Star Wars film, and I went to see him. He had only done one film as a director before. And I said, Mr. Lucas, I'm really happy to meet you, and that you're thinking about me for your film is tremendously good, but I don't have any experience as a visual effects cameraman. You should probably take Mr. Unsworth, who had photographed 2001. And he said, yes, but he's not available. So he said, I'm interested in you, but the studio...
It's a very unusual conversation.
Yes.
Usually the people say, hire me, please. Yes.
But the studio, 20th Century Fox, thought of him as an inexperienced director, and me as an inexperienced cinematographer. I had probably only shot 6 movies before that one, and they put him together with a more senior cinematographer of great quality. But the two of them didn't enjoy each other's company. The cinematographer said, I think, that the film would never be a success. And that was Star Wars. So he came back to me for the second one when he had already hired another director, Irvin Kershner, to shoot it. So he asked me to meet Irvin Kershner. We liked each other, and he liked my work. So we worked together, and I said, I still have no experience in visual effects. And they said, it doesn't matter, we'll take you to our headquarters in San Francisco, and you can talk with the technicians there. And then I understood that nobody knew really how they were going to solve the problems. And I now feel that in life, generally, nobody knows what they're doing. The only time you have to hope that people know what they're doing is when you're in the operating theatre as a patient, or in the airplane. Because I know that I don't know what I'm doing.
That's really surprising. Are you personally a Star Wars fan?
Not particularly. I haven't seen
Me either.
The films. No.
To be honest, I never get it. No. Absolutely. What's so fascinating about Jedi?
I'm not a comic strip fan, and I'm not per se a science fiction fan. I think science fiction can be a good genre if you have an intelligent script behind it and good ideas. But for the sake of science fiction, I'm not interested just because it's science fiction.
Did it happen to you too that you would finish a movie and you would think, well, this is not going to make any kind of success, and then surprisingly it's right the opposite?
Yes, I think it did.
What was it?
In the case of the film I'm going to mention, I didn't think it was never going to be a success, but nobody working on the film thought it would be such a big success. And that was the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Today it's classic.
Yes, still running, which is astonishing. Running. Yes, and it hasn't really aged either, because it's so eccentric that it will have another few years life, I think.
If you do a movie like Star Wars and it's successful, does it change your career? Did you recognize any
I think inevitably it does. When you've done something successful, even if you've only swept the floor as your job, because the business is full of superstition, because nobody knows, none of the producers are confident about what can make a success, except by repeating something else that they've done that was a success. Because of that reason, if you've swept the floor, you're likely to get employment on another film because some of your magic might rub off on the new film.
Yeah.
So I'm going to translate it to my job, which yes, with a successful film behind me, I got some more offers of that kind of film, science fiction film.
Yeah.
You do tend to get categorized, and I tried to escape from that categorization. But I made another science fiction film hard on the heels of Star Wars, and it was not an interesting film. It was very pleasant to make, very interesting to make, but not a good film.
What was the title?
It was called Krull.
Yeah. But then you did Mars Attacks.
Yes.
That was kind of parody on science fiction. I guess Star Wars could be a good training for this one.
Yes, but I think Tim Burton was more seduced, if I can use that word, by the Rocky Horror Picture Show than he was Star Wars.
Yeah.
He showed me quite a number of science fiction films from the early 1950s, and he wanted that spirit in his film.
He's a brilliant painter as well.
Yes, he's
a completely funny, entertaining person.
Absolutely, yes.
I have to say, he had an exhibition in Prague 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we had him in our program, and he was really... You can feel the personality immediately.
Yes.
This way he goes from the door to the chair, and you see immediately, well, this guy is really special.
He gets enormous pleasure from doing what he does, and he laughs to himself when he's directing a film.
So for you, the basic thing is the script, is it?
It is. It is. I want to be convinced that the film could possibly be successful, and I don't mean financially, but could be artistically successful. And I don't think I've ever seen a bad script turned into a good film, but I have seen good scripts fail. But if you have a good script, there's a chance of the film being good. It's the skeleton of the film.
Yeah. If you are reading the script, do you see the images?
Only sometimes.
Sometimes.
They have to come to me slowly, the images, by talking with the director and by seeing where we will film and talking with the production designer. It's like a mosaic that has to come together. Mm-hmm. Only sometimes do I see images.
Do you keep them?
Well, I was going to add that I like to keep an open mind until the last moment.
Yes. Is there a book or a novel you would love to shoot? Something what was never done before?
That's a good question, but most of the things that I like to read as literature won't translate successfully to film. And when I read a book that I really like, very often I think to myself, I hope this is never made into a film.
And that's exactly what happens then.
Yes.
I love the silly books. The more silly it is, the more success it gets. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, usually. Yeah. I think for a DP, the rhythm of the scene can be quite important. And I remember we had once Jason Robards, who came for the film festival to Karlovy Vary. And he was just talking when they did Once Upon a Time in the West, that Sergio Leone put always music on the set. I think this can be pretty useful.
I'm not sure.
Yeah?
I think if you read the history of the cinema during the silent film era, they often had a small orchestra on the set. Yeah. Music can make you believe that what you're filming at the moment is wonderful. And when you take the music away, it's not so wonderful.
That's true.
So I'm not sure if it's a good idea.
It should be the music for the movie, the same one. Then it could work as a coexistence.
That's not always possible, because usually the music is composed afterwards.
Yeah. Your name sounds pretty Czech. Your second name.
I think it probably is. My father was born in Vienna, but he thinks the name comes from Suschitzky.
From Suschitzky. So have you been there?
I have been there.
Like it?
Yes, it's a lovely part of the country, beautiful landscape around there, especially at this time of the year with the trees flowering. His mother came from Brno, But the rest, his father was born in Vienna.
Welcome home.
Thank you, yes, thank you.
And thank you so much to be in our program.
It's a real pleasure having been here. Thank you.
Dnes byl naším hostem na plovárně pan Peter Suschitzky.